When we bought the old craftsman-style home at the end of Alderwood Lane, we thought we were stepping into peace. After 20 years in high-stakes federal service, the promise of a quiet neighborhood with manicured lawns and chirping birds seemed like a welcome retreat. My wife Michelle called it early retirement. I called it a tactical relocation close to the city, but far from noise, politics, and bad actors. We were wrong. 3 days after moving in, the doorbell rang. A woman in a pale blue cardigan stood on our porch with a clipboard tucked under one arm and judgment packed tightly into her frown lines. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Hills," she said in a voice that strained to sound sweet but cracked under the weight of authority. "I'm Karen Whitmore, HOA president, the last 8 years." I shook her hand. "Gabe Lawson, nice to meet you." She scanned me with narrowed eyes like a TSA agent evaluating a suspicious carry-on. Michelle joined me at the door, offering a warm smile. But Karen's eyes barely flicked to her dot. Karen handed us a thick welcome packet. "All the bylaws are in there. It's imperative that you read it thoroughly. We take compliance seriously here. It's what keeps this neighborhood so pleasant." With that, she turned and walked away. No goodbye, no smile, just a sharp pivot on beige heels. It was my first warning. I'd worked narcotics, cybercrimes, and deep fraud cases. I knew control when I saw it, and Karen Whitmore was a woman who needed it like oxygen. At first, we did our best to comply. We painted the mailbox the approved shade of birch gray. We replaced the welcome mat because it had the word howdy instead of hello. I even parked my truck inside the garage to avoid any complaint about its rugged look. We were careful until we weren't. It was a Thursday. Trash pickup had run late, so I left the bin outside until after dinner. At 7:23 p.m., I rolled it back. At 7:36, I got an email. Greater than violation notice. Sanitation code 3B. Visible bin passed approved. Hours. Fine. $275. Oak Ridge Hills Homeowners Association. Michelle laughed. "Is this a prank?" I didn't answer. I'd seen this tactic before, just not in a neighborhood of retirees and solar panels. The next day we got another violation, this one for unauthorized vegetation. Translation: Michelle had planted tomatoes in a front yard planter. The fine, $150 by the end of the week. We'd been cited 5 times for minor offenses like leaving a porch light on past curfew, using an unregistered hose length, and my personal favorite, excessive driveway dust. Total fines, $1,180. I wasn't surprised when Karen came strutting up to the porch the following Sunday, arms crossed and face taut. "I assume you've received the notices?" she asked, glancing past me into the house as if she owned the place. "I have," I said calmly. "These fines are not optional. The HOA operates under binding legal authority, and if you refuse to pay—" "I didn't say we refuse," I interrupted. "I said, I've received them. Doesn't mean I agree." Her jaw tightened. "If you think you're going to bring in some out-of-town attitude and undermine this community's standards, think again. We value order here." Michelle stepped in. "Order isn't the same as control." Karen's nostrils flared. "I'll remind you both that failure to comply may result in escalated enforcement. I've already contacted law enforcement regarding your behavior." She turned on her heel and walked off like she'd just dropped a bomb. What she didn't realize was she'd lit the fuse. I closed the door and turned to Michelle. "She called the cops over a trash bin," I said. Michelle snorted. "You gonna tell her, or should I?" I shook my head. "Let her find out the hard way." Karen had no clue who we were. Michelle had spent 15 years at the U.S. Treasury busting mortgage fraud rings. My brother Danny worked at FBI Internal Affairs. My sister was a DOJ cyberforensics analyst. Me, 22 years in federal fieldwork, mostly with Homeland Security. Last name wasn't just protected, it was classified. Then now Karen had made it personal. Let the games begin. Saturday morning broke with warm sunlight and the smell of Michelle's coffee wafting through the kitchen. I was halfway through my second cup when a cruiser rolled slowly past our house, reversed and stopped at the curb. 2 officers stepped out, both local law enforcement. One was middle-aged with a thick mustache and a clipboard tucked under his arm. The other, younger, lean, and tense, hovered near the cruiser, hand resting casually near his belt. Michelle looked up from her laptop and raised an eyebrow. "Company?" I peered through the window. Across the street, Karen stood on her porch like a self-appointed general overseeing a battlefield. Her arms were crossed, her lips curved into a smug, anticipatory smile. I could practically hear her thinking, "Gotcha." A sharp knock rattled the front door. I opened it to the older officer's practiced nod. "Mr. Lawson, that's me. We received a report from the Oak Ridge Hills Homeowners Association regarding threats, non-compliance, and potential disturbances related to HOA regulations. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Michelle appeared beside me, holding her coffee like a shield of calm. "What kind of threats?" The younger officer stepped forward. "Apparently there was an altercation involving an HOA official. She's claiming harassment and verbal intimidation." I glanced past them toward Karen. She waved. "No altercation," I said coolly. "Just a conversation about a tomato plant in a trash bin." The senior officer gave a tight smile. "We figured as much. but a report was filed. Mind if we step inside? Of course, I said, stepping back, though you'll want to hear the full story before deciding anything. They entered cautiously, scanning the living room. I gestured toward the couch. Have a seat, I'll just make a quick call. Before they could object, I was already dialing. Michelle sat with the officers, her posture open, voice steady. My husband's just calling his brother, he's FBI Internal Affairs. We thought it'd be best to document everything moving forward. The officers exchanged a look. I walked back in, phone still in hand. Danny says to hold tight. He's pulling the HOA's records now. Shouldn't take more than a minute. You're telling us your brother's federal? The younger one asked, skeptically. I nodded. Internal Affairs, Bureau Headquarters. My sister works cybercrime for DOJ and Michelle here's Treasury fraud. Michelle smiled and sipped her coffee. 15 years. Mostly white-collar embezzlement. You'd be amazed how often HOA boards come up in property scams. The senior officer cleared his throat, visibly less comfortable than he'd been at the door. We, weren't made aware of your background. I'm not waiving credentials, I said. But I do take issue with being accused of threatening behavior by someone misusing her power. Just then, Michelle's phone buzzed. She checked it, then handed it to me. Karen Whitmore, HOA president, flagged in 2 federal property complaints, former treasurer for a dissolved HOA under fraud investigation, currently controls over $200,000 in discretionary funds with no independent oversight. I turned the screen toward the officers. The younger one leaned in. This real? Michelle nodded. Straight from the Bureau database. Want me to forward it to your station? They didn't answer immediately. Outside, Karen paced like a cat awaiting applause. When the officers stood and walked toward the door, she straightened and folded her arms, like a judge awaiting a guilty verdict, but her face twisted when they didn't turn toward us with cuffs. Instead, they crossed the street to her porch from our window. I watched the older officer speak calmly. Karen's face dropped. Her hand flew to her chest in mock outrage. She pointed furiously at our house, raising her voice. The younger officer said something that made her freeze. Then both men turned and walked away, leaving her standing slack-jawed. I stepped out to retrieve the mail just as the cruiser pulled off. Karen stormed down her porch. You think you're clever, she hissed. You think flashing some fake agency names is going to scare me off. I know my rights. No doubt you do, I said. But knowing the rules doesn't mean you get to rewrite them. She leaned in. You don't belong here. This is my neighborhood. I'll find a way to get you out. I didn't flinch. Then bring your best, Karen. But be advised, so far, you've just poked the beehive. I turned and walked inside, her glare boring into my back. Michelle was waiting with a smirk. How long until she realizes this isn't over? I poured another cup of coffee. All she knows, she just doesn't realize how deep the hive goes. By Monday morning, Michelle had already spun up an encrypted cloud folder titled Operation Paper Fence. Inside it, she began dropping every HOA notice, fine, and email we'd received, digitized, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. Then throwing dirt, Michelle said, scrolling through public property filings. Let's see what blooms when we dig. Our daughter, Ava, 18, and fresh out of high school, peeked into the kitchen. Mom's building a case again. Michelle gave her a wink. Like riding a bike, I spent the morning on the phone with my sister Lena, DOJ Cyber Forensics. Within an hour, she'd confirmed Karen Whitmore was previously treasurer of another HOA disbanded under federal audit in Arizona. That file had been sealed due to ongoing civil proceedings. Lena flagged the original investigators and looped in a contact from the IRS. Next, I called Danny, FBI Internal Affairs. He agreed to fast-track a preliminary report on Karen's current HOA finances. You really want to go full tilt over some fines? He asked. Danny, I said. This isn't about the fines. It's about the abuse of power she's weaponizing a neighborhood. He paused, then sighed. All right, I'll pull whatever I can. By Wednesday, we had a picture forming. Karen wasn't just a bossy neighbor, she was a repeat offender. Her HOA board had issued over $60,000 in fines in the past 18 months. Nearly 80% of those were levied against just 5 families, 4 of whom had quietly sold their homes and moved out. Michelle traced several discretionary funds to a shell LLC registered under a proxy name, K. Whitestone Consulting. 1 street over from Karen Whitmore. Sloppy, she's not even trying to cover her tracks, Michelle muttered. Eva chimed in, holding up her phone. Look what I found on the neighborhood Facebook group. It was a thread filled with quiet grumbling. Residents complained of mystery citations, HOA dues that kept rising, and Karen's increasingly aggressive behavior. A few hinted at retaliation when they'd pushed back dead plants, petty vandalism, anonymous letters. Michelle sat back. Classic, low-level coercion. She's running this place like a fiefdom. But the final thread came from my cousin Mark, a postal inspector. I'd asked him to quietly investigate the HOA's mailing patterns. Dude, he said over a secure call, she's using a private P.O. box to send official citations. Completely illegal if they're passing them off as government correspondence. Plus, some envelopes were postmarked from out of state. That's mail fraud. I nodded. That's all I needed to hear. The pieces were clicking into place, and fast. That night, I took a walk through the neighborhood. People were polite but distant. A few offered cautious smiles, most just glanced away. The fear was palpable. Karen had done more than write citations. She'd conditioned people into silence. One neighbor, an older man named Mr. Harrelson, caught up to me near the mailbox. He looked around before speaking. "You folks giving her a run?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're asking questions," I said. He gave a tight nod. "Good. Last time someone pushed back, their insurance got mysteriously dropped, and the HOA tried foreclosing for unpaid fines. You think Karen orchestrated that?" I don't think he paused. "I know, but no one wants to fight the queen when she holds the board and the rules. Maybe it's time we flipped the board." He gave me a tired smile. "Good luck, son. Just don't underestimate her." Karen plays dirty. The next morning, Michelle dropped a thick manila envelope on our table. "What's this?" I asked. Every suspicious financial trail tied to Karen's HOA. Shell companies, duplicate invoices, and private contractor kickbacks. And a formal report prepped for the state attorney general's office. All signed, sealed, and ready to go. "You sure we've got enough?" Michelle gave a cool smile. "This is just the beginning. But it's enough for her to feel the heat." We sent the report to Danny, Lena, and the AG's office. Then we waited. By Friday afternoon, Karen's patrol began acting differently. The HOA enforcement crew, mostly neighborhood loyalists with clipboards, stopped walking past our house. No new citations appeared in our mailbox. One even waved awkwardly from across the street. Then, just before dinner, Karen posted a community alert on the HOA website claiming malicious actors were attempting to destabilize the neighborhood and warning residents to report any suspicious federal vehicles. Michelle laughed as she read it. "She knows, she just doesn't know how much we know." I glanced out the window at Karen's house. Her porch light was off, curtains drawn, defensive posture. "She wanted a power game," I said. "Now she's playing against professionals." It started at 8:06 a.m. on a Tuesday. 3 unmarked SUVs rolled silently into Oak Ridge Hills, blacked-out windows, federal plates, the kind of entrance that doesn't knock, it announces. Residents stepped onto porches and leaned into windows, whispering, speculating, but Michelle and I didn't move. We just stood at our living room window, sipping coffee, watching the dominoes fall. Karen Whitmore emerged from her front door in a peach robe and curlers, confusion etched across her face. She scanned the street, saw the SUVs, and froze. Her instincts told her something was wrong, but her ego refused to believe it. The agents moved quickly. 2 walked up her driveway, flashing credentials. One held a federal warrant. Another carried a leather-bound file filled with enough evidence to sink her entire operation. From our porch, I could hear fragments of the exchange. "Karen Whitmore, you are under investigation for federal mail fraud, financial misconduct, misuse of public-facing authority, and obstruction of justice." Her mouth fell open. "This is insane. Run a neighborhood." One agent raised a brow. "You ran it like a cartel." Within minutes, they escorted her into the back of an SUV. No cuffs yet, but the message was clear. Karen's reign was over. Word spread like wildfire. Within an hour, neighbors who once avoided eye contact were knocking on our door, thanking us. One woman burst into tears. "She fined us into bankruptcy," she said. "We thought we were alone." "You weren't," Michelle assured her. "You were just scared. Now it's over." But it wasn't just over. It was being rebuilt. With Karen removed and the board dissolved under federal audit, a temporary oversight committee was established. Residents nominated Michelle to lead it. She initially declined until she saw the desperation in their faces. People didn't want a figurehead. They needed an anchor. "I'll do it," she said at the next town hall. "But not to control, to restore." Cheers erupted. Some cried. Others hugged. Even the old man, Mr. Harrelson, shook her hand with a quiet, "About time." In the weeks that followed, Michelle spearheaded audits and refund requests. Over $140,000 in illegally collected fines were returned to families. Karen's fraudulent shell company was dismantled. Contractors once tied to kickbacks were blacklisted. The HOA's bylaws were rewritten, stripped of the manipulative clauses. Karen had snuck in under ambiguous language like aesthetic harmony and community order. Meanwhile, my brother Danny pushed for formal charges. Karen tried to lawyer up hard, but the paper trail was damning. Not just financial theft, but harassment, forgery, and falsification of HOA documents. Her fines were more like extortion letters. Her enforcement was neighborhood intimidation. She eventually pled out 5 years probation, heavy fines, banned from holding any leadership or fiduciary position within a residential or civic organization. Her house sold under court order to cover restitution the day the moving truck arrived. She stood on her lawn one last time, looking thinner, quieter, reduced. No clipboard, no smile. Just a woman who thought she could bully her way into power until the law she weaponized turned on her. Eva stood beside me, watching. "Think she learned anything?" Michelle shrugged. "Probably not. But the neighborhood did the final twist. The original $275 trash bin find the spark that lit it all. We had it framed. It now hangs in our hallway above the front door, a symbol, a warning, and frankly a family joke. We stayed in Oak Ridge Hills not because we had to but because we'd earned it. We built something here, not just a safer community, but a stronger one. Fear had ruled for years under Karen's manufactured authority. Now people waved on the sidewalk again. Kids played without glances over their shoulders. Neighbors spoke freely on their porches, no longer worried about being reported for a gnome on a lawn or an off-color welcome mat. One evening, as we walked the dog, a young couple new to the neighborhood stopped us. "You're the Lawsons, right? The ones who took down the HOA?" I smiled. Technically, the HOA took itself down. We just showed people how deep the rot went. "Whatever you did," the man said, "thank you. It actually feels like home now." Michelle squeezed my hand. As we walked on, the sun was setting, casting gold across the rooftops, and for the first time since we moved in, Oak Ridge Hills felt exactly as it had promised: peaceful, quiet, free. We didn't come here looking for a fight, but when one found us, we ended it with truth, unity, and just the right amount of federal firepower.